There is a story of a police officer that was watching traffic go by, and he notices there's a car that is going at a slow rate of speed. And all these other cars are whipping around it and honking their horn real loudly. And so the cop's watching this going on, and it's almost kind of an impediment to the rest of the traffic. So pulls out into traffic and follows the car and clocks it going at 41 miles per hour. Does not go any faster than that, does not go any slower than that. So finally, noticing that it's almost creating kind of a problem because the posted speed limit was 70, he pulls the car off. Goes up to the car and notices it's full of nuns. 4 nuns driving the vehicle, and the youngest one looked no younger than 70. And so the officer comes up and asked if there was anything wrong. And no, officer, why? Asked one of the nuns. And then the police officer says, well, I noticed you were going kind of slow, and I just thought something might be wrong. Young man, the nun begins to scold. I know that I don't have much experience driving in my job, but I doubt I was doing anything more than the speed limit of 41 miles per hour. Ma'am, the officer responds, that's the highway sign. You're on Route 41. Oh, no, says the nun. I am so sorry. I thought those signs were my speed limit sign. And then the police officer looks in and notices that the 3 other nuns are just shaking like a leaf and asks them, are you okay? And the first nun that's been speaking says, oh, that's okay. We just got off the Route 119 a bit back. As we learned last week, this is a season to travel. Many of you will, if you're not already, will go on vacation. Or take this opportunity this summer just to get out of town. Or like myself, go to annual conference. 9 hours straight through from here to Topeka. We live in Scottsbluff County. No matter what, we have to travel. Fort Collins, Cheyenne, Lincoln, or even across the river. It's a jaunt, it's a journey. And most likely you're going to find on some of these travels those 4 words. Are we there yet? I know even though I was alone in the car yesterday, I kept saying to myself, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Last week as we introduced this sermon series, we spent some time talking about pivotal decisions. You know, in our life, in our journey, we realize that oftentimes, it's important to stop and ask for directions. This week, we have a journey about trust. When we travel, do we trust the weather reports? Do we trust that the computer is not going to lose our hotel reservations? And speaking of hotels, do we trust that the hotel room will be clean? Do we trust the map? Do we trust the GPS? And most importantly, do we trust our gauges? The speedometer. Is the speedometer right? Well, a police officer can help you out with that. Or what about that mysterious check engine light? Have you ever done that? You clicked on that, it's still there? Oh, well, we'll get it checked out later. And the significant one, the gas gauge. How far can we go when the sign says E? There's a lot of trust that goes on into any trip that we take. When Emma was a baby, we found that it was a bit easier to travel with her at night. She would sleep, we were young, she wouldn't be fussy, we would get to our destination. It was great. It was Christmas Eve. Sarah knows where this story is going. It was Christmas Eve. I had just preached at the 2 churches that I was serving in southeast Nebraska, and we were traveling to see Sarah's parents in Colorado Springs. I had driven much of Nebraska, and Sarah taken over as I was sleeping. Now, I knew something was amiss when Sarah turned to me and says, "How far can we go when the light comes on?" You know what light I'm talking about, the low fuel light. Long story short, we didn't make it to North Platte. But due to a nice Lincoln County deputy sheriff who took us to the hotel, and to a tow truck that towed our vehicle, because guess what? When a car runs out of gas, the fuel line freezes up on it. And to a mechanic that worked all night long on Christmas Eve to make sure that we could get on the road for Christmas Day, we had a story worthy to tell of a sermon illustration and a lesson on trusting our gauges. I think we can all learn a thing or two about Elijah the prophet. He's this First Testament prophet that we're learning quite a bit about this summer and trying to sing his song here in the beginning. Elijah traveled throughout the northern kingdom of Israel. Now, this is after David and Solomon. After they were kings, Israel broke up into a northern and southern kingdom. This is a northern story. Elijah is part of that northern kingdom of Israel. At that point, Elijah's trying to make a name for himself. He's a young prophet. And as we learned last week, he had this successful confrontation with the priests of Baal. In fact, you're going to hear a lot about Baal because that's the competing religion against the God of Israel. Well, last week we learned a lot about choosing the right direction. Today, it's a lesson on doubt and trust. Would you go ahead and share with us the passage from 1 Kings?
Elijah and the widow in Zarephath. Then the Lord said to Elijah, "Now go to the town of Zarephath near Sidon and stay there. I have commanded a widow who lives there to feed you." So Elijah went to Zarephath, and as he came to the town gate, he saw a widow gathering firewood. "Please bring me a drink of water," he said to her. And as she was going to get it, he called out, "And please bring me some bread too." She answered, "By the living Lord your God, I swear that I don't have any bread. All I have is a handful of flour in a bowl and a bit of olive oil in a jar. I came here to gather some firewood to take back home and prepare what little I have for my son and me. That will be our last meal, and then we will starve to death." "Don't worry," Elijah said to her. "Go on and prepare your meal. But first make a small loaf from what you have and bring it to me, and then prepare the rest for you and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The bowl will not run out of flour or the jar run out of oil before the day that I, the Lord, send rain." The widow went and did as Elijah had told her, and all of them had enough food for many days. As the Lord had promised through Elijah, the bowl did not run out of flour, nor did the jar run out of oil. Sometime later, the widow's son got sick. He got worse and worse, and finally he died. She said to Elijah, "Man of God, why did you do this to me? Did you come here to remind God of my sins and so cause my son's death?" "Give the boy to me," Elijah said. He took the boy from her arms, carried him upstairs to the room where he was staying, and laid him on the bed. Then he prayed aloud, "O Lord my God, why have you done such a terrible thing to this widow? She has been kind enough to take care of me, and now you kill her son." Then Elijah stretched himself out on the boy 3 times and prayed, "O Lord my God, restore this child to life." The Lord answered Elijah's prayer. The child started breathing again and revived. Elijah took the boy back downstairs to his mother and said to her, "Look, your son is alive." She answered, "Now I know that you are a man of God and that the Lord really speaks through you."
Well, as we have been learning already, Elijah is a fascinating prophet. Just before this incident takes place, Elijah challenges the king. The king of Israel had just married Jezebel, and Jezebel was a follower of the worship of Baal. And Elijah didn't think it was right for the king of Israel to allow someone who worshiped the opposing religion into the royal household. So right then and there, he was on the outs with the royalty. Then after that, he prophesies a drought. But here's kind of the strange thing. I mean, it's raining and everyone looked out and it's green and everyone said, Elijah, you're crazy. There is not going to be a drought. And even the priests of Baal said, you're crazy. There's not going to be a drought. And here's kind of the interesting thing about Baal. Baal is kind of an agricultural religion. They worship a bull. They have people that you go to the temple of Baal to pray for rain. And so the priest said, if you continue to worship Baal, we'll make sure it rains. So Elijah, he leaves the capital city. He is down in the dumps. Things are not going well. He's challenged royalty, and they kind of kicked him out. And he's challenged, he prophesies this drought, and he's been kicked out. That leads us to today's story. And at this point, he's beginning to question his own trust in the God of Israel. What we have here is kind of this interesting encounter with the widow and her son. Elijah, he's hungry, but the widow is very poor, and she doesn't have enough food. In fact, she says, all we have is one last meal, and then we're going to die. But Elijah convinces her that she has enough, and she must trust the prophet. And there the miracle happens. But then the trust is put to test when the son dies. First, she blames Elijah. Elijah shows up. Her son dies. She's thinking coincidence. Now, the miracle to provide food is nothing compared with this. And so Elijah, he takes the boy, and then something interesting happens. If you caught it there in verse 20. He cried out to the Lord, O Lord my God, have you brought calamity even upon the widow with whom I am staying by killing her son? Elijah's having some doubts here. He is not trusting his gauges. My friends, doubt is normal. It's one of my favorite things about this passage. Elijah appears and he seems to have all of this confidence. He visits with the widow and says to her, it's going to be okay. You will have enough food. And then when the son dies, he says, it will be okay. But then the passage kind of lets us in on this inner struggle. He is scared. He's just had these run-ins with the queen and the priests of Baal, and he begins to doubt his own abilities. The parallel with Jesus, it's no coincidence. In fact, Jesus is asked time and time again, especially by John the Baptist, are you indeed Elijah come back to life? The connection there is not coincidental. Both Jesus and Elijah had their doubts. If you remember the passage, just before Jesus is arrested, he goes out to the garden all by himself. And I'm paraphrasing here, but basically he's saying, God, if you don't want me to go through the suffering, if you don't want me to die, I am happy to have this cup pass before me. But God says, that's not my will. And then Jesus goes and continues on. You know, when we travel, we are in the same boat. We put a lot of trust in those things around us. Those maps, those computers, those gas gauges. It really is the ultimate sense of trust. We trust that these things will not leave us stranded. We have placed our life in the hands of another. Yes, these are inanimate objects, but guess what? They are made by human hands. Do we trust what is around us? Now, as we have learned from the widow and from Elijah and Jesus, doubt is normal. And when we travel, it is okay to question our faith, especially when it is in the hands of another. There's a famous story about a bank robber by the name of Pepe Rodriguez. Pepe was a notorious bank robber that he lived in Mexico. He would go across into Texas. He would rob banks, and then he would get back into Mexico before the Texas Rangers could catch him. Well, the Rangers had finally had enough, and they decided to do something illegal. They crossed over the river, crossed the border, and they decided to go directly after Pepe himself. And they knew where his favorite bar was there in Mexico, and they cornered him in that bar, and they had the guns drawn. The Texas Rangers are right there. Now, Pepe Rodriguez did not speak any English. And so these Texas Rangers, they looked at the bartender, and they asked the bartender to translate for them. And they said, tell him that if he doesn't tell us where the money is right now, we're going to shoot him dead on the spot. And so the bartender translated all this for Pepe. Immediately, Pepe explained in Spanish that the money was hidden in the town well. They could find the money by counting down 17 stones from the handle, and behind the 17th stone was all the loot he had stolen. The bartender then turned to the Rangers and said in English, Pepe is a very brave man. He says you're a bunch of stinking pigs and he is not afraid to die. Now I know some of you will get that joke when you're out of the parking lot. That's fine. Essentially, the journey of life is about trust. Do we believe what is told to us? Can we trust the gauges before us? Are we able to put our faith in something without absolute certainty? For the widow, she faced these questions. Even Elijah had his doubts. But if you noticed in each of these instances, there is that moment of trust. They took a deep breath, and like last week, they chose the right path. Today, that breath places our faith in something greater, something higher, something beyond ourselves. You know, this story in 1 Kings establishes Elijah as a powerful prophet, all because he finally and absolutely put his whole trust and faith in the Lord. It built his confidence because he realizes that the Lord was with him the whole time, even when he doubted. Now, some of you may have heard this story before, but it is a familiar one, and I think it is worth repeating on numerous occasions. The story goes like this. A man was towards the end of his life, and he was looking back at his life as almost it was footprints in the sand. And so he was beginning to talk to Jesus, and he says that as he was looking at the footprints, he noticed that there were two sets of footprints, his and Jesus's. But a couple times in his life, there was only one set of footprints. And they always seemed to be in the sand, one set of footprints at the lowest and saddest times of his life. And this really bothered the man, and so he questioned the Lord about it. And he says, Lord, you said that you would never leave me nor forsake me. You said that once I decided to follow you, you would walk with me all the way. But I noticed that during the most difficult times in my life, there were only one set of footprints. I don't understand why, when I need you most, you would leave me. And Jesus replied, my son, I want you to know that I love you and I would never leave you. Look again at those footprints. During your times of trouble and suffering, those footprints that you saw, they were mine, and I was carrying you. In our journeys, we do a lot of trusting. The gas gauge, the hotel computer, but it's all made by human hands. And they will fail us. But if we put our trust in the gauges that God puts before us, we will realize God is with us every step of the way.